So when someone came to my house and saw the piece I'm working on today, and I just mentioned that it had been free, and they said, yes, I would hope so. So that is the level we're starting from today in today's challenge, and that is part of Desert DIY's Ugly Duckling Challenge. So can I raise this piece up from definitely should have been free to something a bit more special? Fingers crossed. All right, let's see how it goes. My Ugly Duckling bookshelf started actually 18 months ago when I first tackled this project and eventually gave up when it just wasn't working for me. It might look okay here, but it was actually a little bit shabby in places, and after I started sanding I realised there was quite a big crack along one of the shelves. It did look quite nice, but it wasn't in brilliant condition, and I needed to use wood filler in quite a few different spots to hide various holes, nail holes and dents. I used my orbital electric sander on the shelves and hand sanded the ridges to get it back to that paler natural wood look. My initial plan was to use stain on the shelves, so I started by using frog tape around all of the edges so the stain wouldn't get up the sides of the bookshelves. Despite the big crack that I had in the shelf, I wanted to stain the shelves and I had a plan for hiding the crack as well. I did a couple of coats of Fusion Mineral Paints Stain and Finishing Oil in Cappuccino, which is a really lovely warm dark brown. And as expected, having the stain really did enhance the quite large crack. My plan for covering up that crack, I mixed some of my wood filler in with the cappuccino stain and filled in the crack with that and then sanded it back, and that made a huge difference to hiding the crack really well. So wood filler mixed with the stain colour is a good option if you have a crack on a stained piece. In the end, the stain wasn't working for me, so I actually ended up painting it with a light green paint. And it's here we end up 18 months later and having attempt number 2 at this project. So coming back to it with fresh eyes, and I played around with doing some different line painting on the sides, and it was still a little bit wonky and needed some more wood filler sanding off. It just wasn't perfect, so let's have another go. To start, I used some 180 grit sandpaper to scuff off some of the ridges caused by the frog tape, and there was a couple of high spots as well left from the paint from the first time. Essentially this was giving it a good scuff sand so that the next coat of paint would have a good surface to grip to. And I wiped off my sanding dust with a damp cloth. And then the final stage of prep, I cleaned it with some White Lightning, which is a TSP cleaner, and then removed that with some new fresh water and a clean cloth. Which meant I was ready for painting and the fun bit. I liked the original light green that I'd gone for, but I didn't have that paint anymore, so I found a similar colour, which was Sea Glass, which is a chalk paint from the Dixie Belle range. To start, I needed a good stir as it had thickened up in the pot. And if you find that it's still a bit thick, you can spray water on the brush or on the piece to help it move along a bit more easily. Firstly, I covered the shelves and I could see just how similar the two greens were, so it was a really good choice of paint, and then I did the sides of the bookshelf as well. I was careful where the side of the bookshelf and the shelf met so that the brush strokes were going in the same direction, as it's easy where two painted surfaces meet to get paint on the opposite surface. I only needed 2 coats to get really nice coverage on the entire piece, and decided not to keep any of it natural wood as the green felt really fresh and bright. It might not be that obvious, but the second shelf actually has a smaller height than the lower down shelves. So on that shelf, with the paintbrush I was using, I kept hitting the bottom of the shelf above. So for my second coat, I changed to a mini brush with a much shorter handle. To make this a bit more of an interesting bookshelf, I wanted to do a raised stencil on the sides. But instead of doing the entire piece, I was going to do a random selection of the area so it would look like it was naturally worn over time. This is the Royal Damask stencil. And there were still a few little imperfections on the shelf, such as a nail that was sticking out a little bit further than any others, so I positioned the stencil so it would cover those areas. For the raised stencil part of this, I used Dixie mud, which is something that I often use as a wood filler. I applied it with this plastic spatula, which literally just scrapes the Dixie mud into the elements of the stencil. Now, Dixie mud shouldn't go down the drain because it dries hard. Of course, it's normally used for something like a wood filler. So to clean the spatula after use, I used a wet wipe to get rid of any of the leftover Dixie mud. While the raised stencil was drying, this was an opportunity for me to paint the bottom of the shelves and also the back of the bookshelf, just to tie it all together nicely. When you want it raised off of the floor so you can get a nice painted finish to the edge of the surface that you're working on, painters' pyramids are your friend. As it's a pyramid shape, the top naturally comes to a point, so it's even okay to use on a freshly painted surface and won't cause you any problems with damaging your paint. Often people ask whether or not to paint the back of a piece of furniture, and I think it generally depends on how heavy the piece is, how likely it is to be removed away from a wall, how much paint and time you're going to spend on doing it. In this case, this is a light bookshelf which may be moved around quite easily, so it just makes sense to spend 5 minutes touching it up at the back. Then the next step, I waited 24 hours for the Dixie mud on the raised stencil to dry and then painted over it in the same original colour of sea glass. Now you could leave it white, but I like to paint over it to make it look like a more naturally integrated part of the piece of furniture. So for now, it does look less visible, but it's going to get more interesting. And then it was time to seal it, and I did 2 coats of a clear coat in satin to give it a nice sheen. And over the raised stencil, I did brush strokes vertically, horizontally, diagonally, in every which way to make sure that every part of the stencil got some sealer on top of it. And then I smoothed out those brush strokes by doing them in the same direction. And the final step was to enhance the raised stencil to make it look a bit more dramatic, and I used white wax over all of the details to make it stand out a lot more. I applied it with a brush, making sure to rub into all the crevices so that the wax would catch in the corners and stay there. And across the shelves I did a crisscross pattern, so I went horizontally across the whole shelf and then vertically across the whole shelf. So where the wax buried into some of the brush strokes, it created a lovely cross-hatch kind of cheesecloth pattern and just made it a bit more visually interesting and added some depth. The nice thing about the character of this bookshelf being a little bit shabby was that the wax settled into the grooves really nicely and highlighted those details. I think the addition of the white wax gives this a sort of beachy, coastal vibe, which feels really in keeping with the springtime. I'm really pleased with the update. In particular, I think the raised stencil just makes this much more interesting and hides some of the flaws that the basic bookshelf had before. And quite a simple update, transforming something that was quite plain into something pretty and charming. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's makeover. What do you think? Has it been upgraded from an ugly duckling into more of a swan? I hope so. Thanks again. See you next time. Bye.